Hi, I want to talk to you a little bit about Katha Pollitt's essay, Learning to Drive. This is a fantastic example of a writer who has made use of some of the tools that creative nonfiction writers use to create a story or a narrative. When we say story, we tend to think of fiction, and of course this is a work of nonfiction, but it's still a narrative. If you haven't read Pollitt's essay yet, stop this video and go read it. If you have read it, grab your book. It's in this book on page 633. And I want to direct your attention to a few of her strategies that I think are particularly effective. So as we've talked about, or as we are going to talk about in the next module, there are four basic tools that a creative nonfiction writer makes use of. So those are questions. I have to look because as soon as I start reciting anything, I blank out. Observation, right? Looking. Questions, research, memory, and synthesis. This particular essay is a fantastic example of observation, memory, and synthesis, and we can assume she did asked some questions and did some research too, but that's sort of invisible or just beneath the surface. One of the things I want you to pay particular attention to is how many different elements or topics she covers within this relatively short essay. I counted 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I counted 5. So of course, learning to drive, that's obvious, right? And I hope that you picked up that learning to drive acts not just as the experiential structure of the essay, but also as a metaphor for something else. I hope you clued in on that. Mother/parents, that's another element. Failed love affair, there's number 3. Ben the driver, the other main character we might say in this particular essay is Ben the driver, and he is presented as the ideal man. Found that interesting. And then of course the location, the streets of New York, and I think she's in Connecticut at one point too, but we have the presence of New York and New York traffic as another element. So these are seemingly very disparate elements that Pollitt does a fantastic job of weaving together. Let's take a look at how exactly she does that in 1 or 2 places. So to start off, oh, and I'm sorry, I said 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's one more element, and this is more like a thematic element, and that is role playing. Did you notice that? That comes up repeatedly. So she's braided all of these elements into a very tight tapestry. Okay, so if you look at the first 2 paragraphs, she opens up. She's in her car, Ben's beside her, she's in the middle of a driving lesson. Now, one of the things I want to draw your attention to is her use of real estate. Real estate, I'm not talking about the actual setting of this essay. I'm talking about the location of information on the page. There are certain places in your essay, and this holds true for fiction as well. We'll be getting to that later in the semester. But there are certain places in your essay that you can put pieces of information and they will take on larger proportions. They will carry more weight for your reader than if they were stuck in other places. One of those places is, of course, the opening line of a paragraph. The other place is the last line of a paragraph. And I want to direct your attention to the last line of paragraph 1 and the last line of paragraph 2. So I'll just read that for you. The last line of paragraph 1, from the rueful look on his once again kindly face, I know that I have failed. And the last line of paragraph 2, the clock on the dashboard reads 7:47. We will role play the test repeatedly during my 2-hour lesson Oh, I'm sorry, that's the penultimate sentence. The last sentence is, I will fail every time. She has deliberately, and this was a deliberate decision on her part, put the notion of her own failure in the last sentence of the first two paragraphs. She's telling us as readers, hey reader, this is a really important idea that I'm going to develop in this essay. I want you to try that in your own writing. Okay, and of course, failure, the notion of failure, the notion of weakness is repeated multiple times throughout the essay, either directly or indirectly, both in connection with her inability to get a driver's license and with her perceived self-failure at hanging on to this lover. And of course, learning to drive is a metaphor for her inability to have a successful relationship. Okay, both things require tricky navigation, right? Okay, now let's look at the first sentence of the third paragraph. It says, observation is my weakness. Do you really think that's true? Is she telling the truth there? That paragraph is all about how she failed to observe warning signs in her love affair. And really, that's when she makes that statement at the beginning of this paragraph, we as readers take it to mean she's referring to her driving. The fact of the matter is, she's really not inobservant. We have tremendous detail of the streets she's driving down, but she is observant, however, when it comes to the behavior of her lover. And of course, we have that in that paragraph. I want you to notice, too, how gracefully Pollitt shifts from talking about her struggles and failures as a driving student to suddenly talking about her failed love affair in the third paragraph. First paragraph, driving. Second paragraph, driving. Third paragraph, suddenly, we're reading all about her failed love affair, and she transitions very smoothly and very gracefully. So pay attention to that. Okay, what else did I want to point out to you? She also introduces the seemingly disparate element of role playing. And again, that comes in at the very first paragraph. The very first paragraph can be an extremely important place to load your essay with the things that you're then going to develop in various ways. If you look at the first few sentences of the first paragraph, we see Ben role playing, right? She tells us he's gentle, and then he has become severe, abrupt, commanding. He is role playing the role of the examiner, right? So we have that idea of role playing. If you continue on, we see that come up again. The idea of role playing. If you look at the end of the top paragraph on page 636, we see her talking to Ben about, will you still be my teacher, Ben, after I get my license, so I can learn how to drive on the highway. Ben promises that he will always be there for me, and I believe him. Ben is role-playing again here. Is he role-playing as a driving examiner? No, he's role-playing as the ideal man. And that is another element that Pollitt weaves in of this essay very, very nicely. I don't want this video to go on too long, so I want to point out a very interesting moment in this essay. It could be read as kind of a downer. I don't know if any of you found it that way. Certainly when I got to about halfway through, I was like, okay, you're kind of having a pity fest here, an artfully done pity fest. But something very good and interesting happens on page 638, and I encourage you to go there. Look at the bottom of the first complete paragraph, and that is about, is that about 2/3 of the way? that's about 2/3 of the way through the story, roughly where we expect a shift. We're going to talk more about the tripartite structure of fiction stories when we get to fiction, but I think what Pollitt is doing here is borrowing that a little bit, where at the end of the second act, or about 2/3 through the story, the narrative, we get a shift. Okay, and this particular shift, I think, really rescues this essay from being, like I said, a pity fest. If you look at that first full paragraph on page 638, I'm just going to read to you the last couple of lines. She says, "It's a lucky thing I didn't get my license. I would still be living with a womanizer, a liar, a cheat, a manipulator, a maniac, a psychopath. Maybe my incompetence protected me." So what we have here is a return to that same theme of failure, but now she's looking at failure in a completely different way. It's failure, she realizes, moment of enlightenment, that has actually saved her from being stuck with this psychopath, her ex-lover. And remember what she said near the beginning? She's not very observant. Notice how observant she is here in describing this jerk. I think you probably came to the same conclusion as me, that the guy's a jerk. That's really important, because this moment on page 638 introduces, like I said, a shift in tone. It introduces an element of hope, and that hope continues through the story. We go to the very last part, in fact, the conclusion of this essay. If you look on page 642, she again is role-playing at the very end. She is role-playing or imagining herself as a successful licensed driver. And at this point, I think we believe her now. She is going to get her license. She has come to the conclusion that she's better off without her ex-lover. Okay, so that's all I want to say. I hope you enjoyed this essay. Like I said, I think it's a great example of how a writer can use observation and synthesis to weave together various elements to create a cohesive whole. And I think Pollitt does it quite successfully. Bye.